One of the most important things to a story is the antagonist. When it comes to the world of fiction, you will find no shortages of obstacles to the main hero's journey. Whether the antagonist is an individual person, a collective group, or an opposing ideology or way of doing things, you will be hard-pressed to find stories that do not have some sort of an antagonist or obstacle to the main protagonist. Some of my favorite stories involve antagonistic characters that are deeply written, ones with multiple layers to them that make them feel that much more human in a way, ones that get fleshed out and become memorable not only because of their actions, but because of their mindset as well. I find that the greatest antagonistic characters tend to be the ones that are in parallel to something related to the main protagonist. You have light versus darkness, hope versus despair, and life versus death. These types of duologies are very popular in anime, manga, and novel culture, and you'll often see antagonistic characters that share those parallels on the top of popularity charts. But what about antagonistic characters that are more cruel? Ones that don't necessarily embody any sort of parallel with the protagonist, and is there more so simply to be an obstacle that needs to be overcome? And while we're on that topic, what if this antagonistic character does something truly horrifying, but grows to regret it? All across the internet I've seen discussions on this, and in the When They Cry community, it's raised quite a few heated discussions about the character who I want to talk about today. In the process of talking about this character, I want to bring up these two questions. What makes a character too evil to redeem? And is it morally right to write an abusive character who changes their ways? Hi, I'm Soru. Today we'll be taking a look into Hojo Teppei as a character, the psychology behind his character and mindset, his role in the Higurashi series and his future role for the end of the series, and looking into how his actions, not only in Higurashi Go episode 23, but also in Higurashi SOTSU make perfect sense, not only in a thematic and story perspective from the worlds of Higurashi and When They Cry, but also how they parallel real-life occurrences and people. I've actually done an analysis on Teppei when episode 23 of Go released, but since then quite a lot has happened. A new season of Higurashi has aired, and a recent interview with author Ryukishi07 confirmed much of my previous analysis, as well as added some other interesting points that I want to mention. I do hope that this video will be able to help people look at Teppei from a slightly different perspective, and maybe help people to understand more about his character, the thoughts motivating him, and some of the parallels between him and other characters. Now, before we get further in, I do have to make a couple quick disclaimers. First, please do not treat this video as fact. This is an analysis based off of my own personal research into it, but every discussion and research has a bit of bias to it, whether it's intentional or not. I've tried to go into researching and analyzing Teppei as unbiased as I can, but I am very likely incorrect or biased in a few things. Second, this analysis is about a rather controversial character who has done some very wrong things, and this video will contain discussions and visuals of events that some people may find triggering. If you are sensitive to visual portrayals of blood, abuse, violence, or death, or if you're sensitive to topics concerning physical abuse or suicide, I would recommend clicking off of this video now. And third, I am not a licensed psychologist. I do not have any professional experience analyzing human behavior in any way. I am simply a nerd who obsesses over morally gray characters and thought-provoking material, and spends way too much time over analyzing and researching things to satisfy the curiosity. With all that being said, this is a discussion as much as it is an analysis, and I would love to hear what everyone thinks, either in the comments or by tagging me on Twitter at Soru. There are multiple things that I would like to discuss in this video, and I would greatly appreciate it if you watched through this video in its entirety. However, if there is a specific thought or moment that you would like to skip to, there will be timestamps down below for easy access, as well as the sources for every interview, article, and paper that I bring up. And with all the disclaimers out of the way, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this analysis. In my previous analysis on Teppei, I mentioned how people were saying that what we're seeing is him getting a redemption arc, and I had disagreed with that thought. I claimed that what we are seeing is him getting more fleshed out and humanized as a character, and I still believe that that is what we are seeing, but I want to talk a bit more about the difference between redeeming and humanizing a character. In most cases of fiction, a redemption arc typically involves the focused character atoning for their flaws and overcoming them, going from an antagonistic role to a more active or inactive protagonistic role, helping either themselves or other people in an attempt to make up or atone for the sins that they have committed. Whereas whereas humanizing a character is when you give your character layers. You show both the good and the ugly side of them, their dreams, their flaws, their emotions, their regrets, and you show the character's struggle with what they care about and how they feel. Imagine a Venn diagram. On one side you have character redemption, and on the other side you have character humanization. There are multiple similarities between the two that overlap, but you also have characteristics that are different. While in concept they are extremely similar, I personally feel like the main difference comes down to what the author is trying to get the readers to feel. I found that when writing a redemption arc, more often than not the author will end up focusing on the good that character ends up doing. And while some redemption arcs do not do this, the majority of them are written in a way to get the characters of that story, and you as the reader, to forgive them. The general message of a character's redemption arc is forgiveness and atonement. Humanizing a character is a little bit different. It's similar in some ways, but different in others, like in the Venn diagram I mentioned before. Just like in redemption arcs, humanizing a character means that we see the good that the focused character does, or at least intends to do. But instead of trying to get the story characters and the readers to forgive them, it's instead trying to make them more realistic, and in many ways, more relatable. While humanizing a character does show the good they could do, it never shies away from reminding you that this character, just like humans in our world, make mistakes. And some of them are a lot more consequential and harmful than others. I personally believe that what we are seeing in Higurashi with Teppei is less of a redemption arc and more of an attempt to humanize and show the different layers that he as a character has. I will be coming back to this later in the video as I talk about more things, but in order for us to really be able to dig into the layers and intricacies of his character, we first need to go back to his origins and take a look into his past role in the series and see how that will affect him later on. The different arcs and fragments in Higurashi are all written in a very interesting way, with each arc having its own focus character struggling with an antagonist of sorts, all while tying in to the overarching story of the series. In Onikakushi-hen, the focus character was Maebara Keiichi, and the thing he was struggling against, the antagonist if you will, was his paranoia prompted by certain events that happened throughout the arc. In Watanagashi-hen, the focus characters were the Sonozaki twins, and the antagonist of that arc were actually multiple things, ranging from jealousy and sorrow to mental illness. Best Sonozaki and CEO of Shion have both analyzed them in depth, and I highly recommend checking them out if you would like a more in-depth analysis on the Sonozaki sisters, and for both Watanagashi and Miyakashi-hen. In the original Tatarigoroshi-hen fragment in Higurashi, Teppei would most certainly be counted as the antagonist of that arc, both for Rika as the main character and for Satoko as the focus character of that arc. For Rika, he was the reason why she couldn't get her happy ending, since the fragments where he returned signaled that a very difficult fragment had come up, and it was one that Rika very often would lose hope in. As for Satoko, he was the abusive uncle who locked her away, keeping her away from her friends and those who she considered family, all while keeping her in a state of constantly reliving through her past trauma. And for the longest time, that was the extent of his character and his role in the series. While other characters who had committed grave sins were either given redemption or were fleshed out, Teppei didn't have any of that. His sole purpose in the series was to be the evil uncle. In a way, we could say that his role revolved around reaction rather than proaction. When it comes to reaction versus proaction, we first need to learn the difference and understand how it fits into Teppei's role in the series. A simple way to differentiate the two is this. According to Merriam-Webster, being proactive is acting in anticipation of future problems, needs, or changes, and according to AliDog, it's to anticipate a problem and provide skills in advance of the problem. Now comparing that to reaction, according to Oxford Languages, reaction is an action performed or feeling experienced in response to a situation or event. But if we dig deeper, there's another definition that often gets overlooked. In psychology, there is a term called reaction formation. A very basic way to explain this would be to say that this is the tendency of a repressed wish or feeling to be expressed at a conscious level in a contrasting form. It's like a defense mechanism that is most often fueled by societal pressure or ego. A more in-depth definition has three main aspects: a repressed wish or feeling, a conscious level, and a contrasting form. The study of reaction formation is honestly fascinating and I recommend checking it out, as the studies that Sigmund and Anna Freud did on reaction formation and defense mechanisms are a very good read. While not every aspect of a reaction formation could apply to Teppei, there is one thing that does match very well with his actions in his previous role, and that would be the conscious level. A paper done by Christina Special and Aaron Horn mentioned how behaviors and actions that are associated with reaction formation are often compulsive. According to the study, despite the compulsivity, the actions are still a fully conscious decision. The individual is very aware of his or her outward behavior. The behavior is simply ingrained in their minds and difficult to change or put a stop to. Bringing this back to Teppei and comparing his actions, his role never allowed him to anticipate or provide anything. He was there as the obstacle, but he never got any development, no in-depth writing or anything like that. But he was a character who had a quick temper and acted rashly and compulsively. Now, let's quickly talk about defense mechanisms. In psychology, defense mechanisms are behaviors people use to separate themselves from unpleasant events, actions, or thoughts. They could be used to separate from things in the present, but they could also be used to separate or block off traumatic moments in the past. According to an article from 1989, roughly 1/3 of people who are abused in childhood will become abusers themselves. And according to the American Society for the Positive Care of Children, about 30% of abused and neglected children will later do the same. While I'm not saying that this is the case, it is entirely possible that Teppei was abused when he was younger and ended up taking it out on Satoko and Satoshi as a result. We do not know much about the Hojo family other than what we see in the series, but we do know that overall relations between them were strained, with Satoko's mother repeatedly divorcing and remarrying, and with Satoko filing false abuse reports in the past. The best way to describe Teppei's role in Higurashi would be as a pawn. In chess, pawns only move in a straight line towards their goal, without going in any other direction unless told to by the player or if taken by an enemy piece. In the same way, Teppei's role only allowed him to be the abusive uncle, whose only job was to hurt those around him until that story reached its end, and then his role ended with the enemy knight taking him out. Compared to the central cast of Higurashi, Teppei never got any development. If you just count the 9 main arcs that we see in the visual novels, Teppei is a key character in 2 of them. Yes, I am aware that there are other arcs besides the main 9, but those are either OVA arcs or arcs that never got adapted into the anime. I do highly recommend reading the other arcs as there is a lot that you could get from them. Despite being a key character for nearly a quarter of the series, he was the only one who didn't have any sort of development, and he was there for his one purpose: go from point A to point B, be an abusive character, and then get discarded. It's interesting because antagonistic characters who got even less screen time, like Rina, got more development, but we don't really see that with Teppei in the original series. In psychological studies over the past several years, a lot of focus has been given to something that is commonly known as near-death experiences. According to these studies, a near-death experience is a profound personal experience that's associated with serious illness, an intense threat, or death. The effects of a near-death experience vary in between those who have had one, but some of the most common reported elements of one are a sensation leaving the body, encountering those who are deceased, vivid recollections of events in the past, and experiencing things that happen in the future. There have been several studies that look into the after effects of near-death experiences, one of which being a 2015 study done by the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia School of Medicine. In the study they mentioned, there is a consistent pattern of personal transformation that follows a similar process, regardless of the type of trauma, which typically includes changes in perception of self, philosophy of life, and relationships. Further into their paper, they talk about a study that they did over the course of 2 to 8 years with cardiac arrest survivors. According to the study, they found that all survivors of a cardiac arrest at follow-up were more self-assured, socially aware, and religious than before the event, but that those survivors who had reported near-death experiences, unlike the other survivors, also showed increased empathy and intuition, greater interest in spirituality, and less fear of death. A comprehensive review of 30 years of research on after effects of near-death experiences documented that the changes most commonly reported after one are compatible with post-traumatic growth, including a greater appreciation for and zest for life, increased focus on the present, sense of meaning and purpose in life, compassion for others, and reduced concern for material gain or status. In addition to this, according to studies and interviews with people who are on deathbed or who have brushed up against death, one of the most common things brought up was regret. Regret for not pursuing their dreams, regret for not taking care of themselves, and regret for not being a good person, particularly towards family. not being a good father, a good mother, a good child, and so on. Regret is a very common thing when people are facing death, and according to a study done by Dr. Bruce Grayson from the Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences and interviews with survivors of near-death experiences, those who have had a near-death experience tend to strive to better themselves, whether it's by fixing their bodies, pursuing their dreams, or by improving or repairing relationships that had been broken in the past. Now, what does all of this mean for Teppei? In episode 23 of Higurashi Go, we see Teppei having what can be described as a near-death experience, with him waking up at the end of it confused by what he's seen. I mentioned before that some of the most reported elements of a near-death experience was vividly recalling past moments and events that had yet to happen, but there's another element that could be discussed. According to Dr. Bruce Grayson and Lee Graves, there are a number of 16 different elements that commonly fall into the experience of a near-death experience. One of the elements is experiencing a different or unearthly world. And in a way we see Teppei doing just that, experiencing events and fragments that, according to his reality, he shouldn't even be able to see, much less feel. According to the story of Higurashi, this is brought on by the use of Eiwa's power, which Satoko has been using to travel between fragments in pursuit of Rika. As a result of her constantly looping between fragments, there are people in her world who are able to remember events from other fragments that they should not remember. This isn't the first time Higurashi has done something like this. One of the bigger plot points in the first season of the anime was when Keiichi remembers the events in Onikakushi-hen, which was an event that he shouldn't have known about or experienced since he was in an entirely different fragment. According to Rika, this was a miracle, but if we take into account Eiwa's power and how Hanyu is inferior to her, it is a safe bet to say that the reason Keiichi was able to remember, and why the other club members eventually started remembering past events as well, was due to Rika constantly looping between fragments. With our knowledge of what a near-death experience could do to someone, Teppei's actions, not only in the rest of that episode, but also in the entirety of Sotsu so far, make perfect sense. He even mentions it himself, and questions what he was doing with his life up to that point, and acknowledged that if he continued down the path that he was walking, he would end up dying alone with regrets. Wanting to change himself and wanting to repair the broken relationship that he has with his only surviving family realistically makes a lot of sense, and it lines up with what many people choose to do after having a near-death experience.
だからそれと同時に日暮っていうのはこう重い罪を犯した登場人物が後悔してやり直すことを認める話でもあるんで、そういう意味では鉄平もその世界観にのっとって自分の犯した罪に対して後悔し、今からでもやり直そうと思う資格はあるわけで。
Teppei's actions in Go 23 caught pretty much everybody off guard, but looking into the writing that Ryukishi tends to do, and then comparing it to what we've seen in the series so far, we could start to piece together the overall mindset and thought process that Teppei has. Once we look into Teppei's mind and see how he's acting, how he's speaking, and how he generally presents himself now, we could get an idea of the three main aspects that are driving his character towards his new role in the series. The first aspect would be regret. As Ryukishi said in the interview talking about Satoko, Teppei, and the story of Sotsu so far, we're now being introduced to a new side of Teppei, one that feels remorse and genuine guilt for all of the pain and wrongs that he has committed. There are multiple times so far in Sotsu where Teppei has expressed that he regrets what he has done and that he had hurt Satoko, and we see him constantly being hard on himself and wanting to find a way to make up for the pain that he had caused her. Seeing how nearly all of his actions are driven by regret, we could see how sincere he actually is, and that he really is doing his best to atone for his sins. The second aspect would be dreams. We see Teppei telling Satoko that he dreams that he'll be able to live with her and take care of her while he tries to rebuild their broken relationship. And we see him actively do so with the third aspect, which would be his determination. Simply dreaming that everything would be okay and that your sins were atoned for doesn't work. You have to actually put in the work in order to make things happen. You have to actually apologize before getting closure, and you have to actually atone before forgiveness. And we see Teppei doing just that. If Teppei had just said that he wanted to atone, but never actually did anything, then his apology would not have been sincere, and it wouldn't have touched Satoko's heart in nearly the same way as it does. We actually see Teppei putting in the work, with him cutting out negative influences from his life and trying to improve himself overall. We see him separate himself from the rough, rowdy, and overall unhealthy people that had influenced him in previous arcs, and we see him attempt to cut alcohol and drinking out of his life, which is a major thing that was brought up in Tatari Damashi-hen. Quitting from any addiction is a difficult thing to do, and alcohol is certainly no exception. Recovering from alcoholic addiction is very difficult, and while studies by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism show that roughly 36% of people who quit alcoholic addictions recover within the first year, studies by the Recovery Village and Dr. Andrew Frolix show that about 30% of them relapse in the first year of sobriety, and over 70% relapsing at some point. Seeing Teppei being this determined to better himself and to atone for what he has done, we could really see how sincere he is in his apology, and that he truly does want to try to make Satoko happy, and we see that he will even prostrate himself in public in order to ask for help. But despite all of that, I don't believe that Ryukishi is writing him in a way to make us forgive him. Or rather, I do not believe that he is trying to make us forgive him, but is instead giving us a choice. Just like with Satoko, he is letting us choose whether we want to forgive him or not, and in the process, he is laying Teppei as a character bare, and letting us see all of the ins and outs of this character so that we can make our decision. The actions that Teppei does during the series now fit in the overall theme and message of Higurashi and When They Cry. I will go more into detail on that in a little bit, but before we do, I feel like we need to take a step back and take a look into why Satoko, Teppei, and the whole story of Tatari Goroshihen hits as hard as it does, and why out of all of the arcs featured in Higurashi, it feels the most realistic and chilling of them all. One of the most interesting things that you could do when you get invested into a story is to look at the author. With many psychological, fantasy, or dramatic stories, you can often learn about the author and their experiences with certain things that are present in their stories, and doing so could help gain a deeper understanding and connection to their works. When an author writes about something that they are passionate about or something that they have experienced, it comes across as being that much more genuine. Due to them having seen what the characters have seen and felt what the characters have felt, it feels so much more real because what is being portrayed in the story is a retelling of past experiences, whether it's a one-to-one retelling or if it's simply based off of it. And Ryukishi is no exception to this. Many fans of the Higurashi and When They Cry series know that Ryukishi was previously a social worker, and that he used his experience as one to help write some of the characters that are present in his stories. But not too many people are aware of just how in-depth he actually goes. When it comes to writing these events, Ryukishi doesn't offer too many hints into just how much of a retelling some of the more realistic moments in Higurashi and Yumeneko are. However, there are a couple of instances where he does talk about his past experience as a social worker and how it affected him writing these stories. In a French interview in 2012 at Epitanime, the following question was asked. In Higurashi and Yumeneko, we often see complicated relationships between children and adults. For example, in Higurashi between Satoko and her uncle. Did this professional experience inspire you? Ryukishi answered this with, "During the 10 years I was a civil servant, I went through many departments where I learned a lot of things. And yes, this experience is reflected in Higurashi and Yumeneko." When it comes to fictional stories of abuse, the ones that generally hit harder are the ones that are told by survivors. And those who work with survivors and experience the effects live with what they've seen their whole lives. With the writing in Higurashi and Yumeneko, we see the arcs that deal with abuse and other things that a social worker could see hit the hardest. For Higurashi, it was Tatari Goroshi and Mina Goroshihen, and in Yumeneko, it was present throughout nearly the entire series, particularly the relationship between Rosa and Maria. The reason why these arcs hit so hard at times is because in many ways, they could be events that actually happen to people. In our world, these types of tragic events where people get abused by their family is unfortunately quite common. And the reason these stories hurt is because it's very likely that we know someone who is going through that exact scenario, or they know someone who's going through it. In learning about the past experience and psychology of Ryukishi, looking into how he writes his characters is quite fascinating. As a social worker, he would have seen many things that the vast majority of us would not be able to see. He would have been able to see the different sides of the people around him, both his co-workers and for the people who he met while he was working, and we see him utilize that in his characters. No character in his series is perfect. Every single character has some sort of fault, but at the same time, every character has some sort of positive about them, just like how we are in the human world. If we're looking at the characters in Higurashi, Keiichi's biggest flaw was that he was prone to anger and ended up hurting people as a result. However, he was able to turn that flaw into a positive and tries to use his anger to instead make a difference, spurring on the village to help Satoko and Tatari Goroshi and Tatari Damashihen. Satoko's biggest flaw is her toxic obsession, but she has many positive positives as well. She is kind, caring, and protective of those around her. And even Rika has her flaws. She's stubborn and mistreats her friends at times, but she also has positives of her own. Just like in our world, the characters that Ryukishi has created all have their own sides to them. For just as many flaws that a character has, they have just as many good points. And in both Higurashi and in our world, it comes down to whether or not we let our flaws consume us and we act primarily on them, or if we balance the two and acknowledge our flaws, but strive to overcome them and to better ourselves and help those around us. In a Japanese article that interviewed Ryukishi in 2007, he was asked if he learned anything that was useful when he worked as a social worker. His answer is honestly interesting, and it explains a lot about the way he writes his characters. It is no exaggeration to say that all of my experiences as a civil servant have been useful. One of the biggest things is that I was able to work within the rules and learn about society. There were young people and experienced people in the same environment, and being able to work while interacting with a variety of people have been a great source of inspiration. Having met so many people and working with them, Ryukishi's way of writing his characters become a little easier to understand, and we could see how many of the characters seem very grounded in reality, despite his stories being in a fictional setting. I mentioned before that Teppei's actions in Sotsugyo fit perfectly in the themes and message of Higurashi and When They Cry as a whole. There's a number of different ones scattered throughout the series, but I've found that there are 3 that seem to have a major focus throughout the entire series. I haven't read through Sasonia, so I'm not sure if they're present there, but they are present and focused on in the other stories of the When They Cry series. It feels like there are 3 separate themes in Higurashi and Yumeneko, and there are 3 messages that correlate and work with them. I showed a clip of Ryukishi mentioning one of the themes earlier in the video. The first one I want to talk about is the theme of regret and the message of forgiveness. In Higurashi, regret is one of the biggest reoccurring themes throughout the series, with multiple characters expressing regret and atoning for the sins for forgiveness. All throughout the series, we see characters learn to acknowledge when they do something wrong, and the guilt and regret that comes along with it. We see it with Keiichi in his past school, we see it with Rena with her parents and Rina, and we see it through Takuno and her attempts to kill Rika. Regret is a very common theme, and the message that goes along with it is forgiveness. Forgiveness from both other people, but also forgiving yourself. In Mio Tsukushihen, we see Keiichi go visit the girl who he had injured and beg for forgiveness. She does end up forgiving him, and he carries the bullet that he had shot her with as a constant reminder to be a better person. We also see him being forgiven by Rika when he admits that he snuck into the warehouse on the night of Watanagashi. With Rena, we see her being forgiven by Keiichi and the others in Sumihoroboshihen, and with Takuno, we see her asking forgiveness in Nekodamashihen. The themes of regret and forgiveness go even further than Higurashi, as in Yumeneko, we see regret from Rosa, Angie, and Beatrice, and we see the overall message of forgiveness in their stories as well. The second theme of Higurashi is self-discovery, and the message that correlates and blends with it is acceptance, searching yourself and learning about who you truly are, what path you are on, and where you want to go. We see this a lot with the Sonozaki twins, especially in the answer arcs of Higurashi, and we see this explored a little bit with Rika in Saikoroshihen as well, but where this theme truly shines is in Yumeneko. I will not be going into too much detail as I do not want to spoil the series for those who haven't read it, but the themes of discovering who you are and what you want, and the message of accepting yourself and those around you is a very common theme that is explored, especially in the later half of that series. The third and final theme would be trust, and the final message would be friendship. Out of all the themes that we see throughout Higurashi, this is probably the most focal one. Learning how to trust yourself and how to trust those around you. We see this get emphasized as early as Onikakushihen with Keiichi, as the tragedy that took place was a result of his paranoia and his lack of trust in those around him. And it's an even bigger focus later on in the series with Rika, where she learns to trust her friends with her secret that she is living in loops. The power of friends trope is something that is done quite often in fiction, and in many ways it feels very forced, but in Higurashi it feels extremely natural. We see the results of when there is no trust, and fear and paranoia settle in and take control, and we see the progression of characters slowly learning how to trust and believe in their friends and themselves. One of the things friends are for is to be there for you even when you're not there for yourself, and when you start going onto a wrong path, they could help you back onto the right one. In terms of how all of these fit with Teppei, let's take a look into his actions and the parallels he shares with other characters. With Keiichi, he shares parallels with regret. Both of them share their regret in having hurt someone else, and both of them have begun growing and maturing as a result. With Keiichi, he used his regret to make himself a better person for his friends and become much more passionate about helping those in need. And with Teppei, we see him using his regret to drive him towards cutting out the negative influences in his life so that he won't hurt his family ever again. With Satoko, he also shares parallels with regret, but they also share parallels in their entire character. In the original series, Teppei lashed out in his misguided emotions towards other people. Those emotions normally consisted of anger and hatred, whereas with Satoko, she has been lashing out in misguided emotion in Sotsugyo, with jealousy and pain being hers. The both of them let their emotions get the better of them, and they hurt those around them as a result. While the abuse that Teppei dealt to Satoko is different than what Satoko is currently doing to Rika, the same toxic mindset is still there, but in the same way, they both have their regrets about what they have done. I've already mentioned before that Teppei changed who he was due to him regretting and feeling guilt over the pain that he had inflicted onto Satoko, but we can also see that in Satoko. In Nekodamashi and Satoko Washihen, we see the toxic obsession, pain, and trauma that Satoko dealt with reach an all-out high, and we see her start acting in a way that many people don't quite agree with. I've seen a lot of people say that Satoko's character as a result of those two arcs and what we're currently seeing in Sotsu have completely ruined her, but in my opinion this was honestly the only way the series could have continued, and it makes perfect sense on why Satoko is feeling and acting the way that she is. I will be doing an in-depth analysis on Satoko in the future, so if you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe for when that comes out. Just like how Teppei's anger and hatred boiled over to the point where he began hurting those around him, we see Satoko's pain and trauma boil over until she begins to hurt those who are dear to her. But in the same way that Teppei's actions change due to his regret, we see that Satoko regrets what she has done as well, to an extent. In episode 10 of Sotsu, we see her regret reach a breaking point, and she has an internal conflict over what she truly wants to do. While the human side of her that showed that regret was eventually sealed away, that regret is still there, and will most likely linger inside of her until it eventually overflows again. Now that we've gone over Teppei, it's time to ask the question, what's next? We've gone over his psychology and how his abuse carried over throughout the series. We've gone over his near-death experiences and how it changed him. And we've gone over the themes of Higurashi and how Teppei's actions translate into our world. The question remains, now that his past role is obsolete, what is his role now? Ryukishi doesn't really give any hints other than he will likely be an important player, but I personally feel like he'll be one of the most important characters by the end of the series. At this point of the story, Teppei and Satoko parallel each other almost perfectly. I've already gone over the ways that the two are similar, and I feel like the reason everything's been written like this is so Teppei could be the catalyst for Satoko's regret pouring over. We see a little bit of that in episode 10 of Sotsu when her regretful side splits off from her hurt side for a short time. Twitter user 96% Done did a really good job at looking into Satoko's mentality during that scene. I think it was actually significant and essential that Satoko hits her breaking point with Teppei, not anyone else, because Teppei to Satoko is the representation of pure evil and malice. Satoko knows her friends love her and will ultimately be good people. She justifies doing cruelty to them, knowing that her real friends on the ideal timeline will be somewhere else. She doesn't have to like hurting them, but the ends still justify the means. We actually see Satoko going through that with her apologizing to her friends when she uses them, but she truly believes that it will all be worth it when everyone has their happy ending. That's not how it works with Teppei though. To Satoko, the real Teppei is the one who beats the shit out of her when he's not actively ignoring her. This new Teppei is just a weird glitching copy for her to use, and he continues to defy her expectations. Even as she uses him, she's not expecting him to be good. She's expecting him to be violent and snap and become abusive and be the horrible shithead she knew him as. And he won't. Teppei represents evil to her, but he's being good. If Teppei is good, then what is Satoko? She can't consider herself better than him anymore with what she's done. On some level she knows that, but every time Teppei specifically proves himself to be trying to be good, it reminds her of just how hard she is trying not to be. It's seeing evil make the transformation. What makes this whole thing so poetic is that Satoko is the reason why Teppei ended up changing. Because of her, he was able to realize what a dark path he was on, and wanting to change who he was and atone, he began the work to make himself a better person. While Satoko did not mean for Teppei to change, she is still the reason why he remembered his past fragments and is the main motivation for him to continue to improve himself and to protect her. Going all the way back to the chess example I gave at the beginning, Teppei's previous role would be best described as a pawn, going from point A to point B, and as soon as its job was done, it would be cast aside. Now, His role more closely resembles a rook, not being used often, but is there as the protector of the king, and the one that will likely turn the tide of battle. If there is one thing I want to bring focus to, it's not Teppei's apology to Satoko, nor is it his actions and attempts to right his wrongs and to become a better person. It's Satoko's reluctance and hesitation to forgive him that I want to bring attention to. That single detail is what makes this so much more meaningful and a lot more realistic. Satoko has suffered from years of trauma, both from her own life that she remembers in fragments, and also from watching the 100+ years of fragments where she was abused, and her hesitating and being wary of Teppei is very realistic. If Satoko had just forgiven him right off the bat, it would have taken away from the realism of it, and it would have taken away from both of their characters. However, because Satoko rejected his apology, their characters can be written in a way that allows them to grow. For Satoko, her character now can be focused on dealing with her unhealed trauma and mental issues, which is a big part on why she's acting the way she is in Sotsugo. And for Teppei, it's a very good way to further humanize him, having to deal with Satoko rejecting his apologies and learning how to accept that and to move on. We actually see him do just that, and as soon as he knew Satoko wouldn't forgive him, he accepted it and walked away, which was the best thing to do in that scenario for his character. Those are pretty much my thoughts and what I've found when looking into Teppei's character. While what he did was extremely wrong and unforgivable, his actions and mindset in Sotsugo are something that I do admire, and seeing him work on improving and bettering himself is something that I legitimately enjoy. You don't often see characters undergo this drastic of a transformation, and I believe that this is one of the best cases of one that I have seen. But anyway, those are my thoughts on Teppei. I'm curious on what you all thought. Do you agree with what was said, or do you have a different opinion to bring to the table? I'd love to hear what everyone has to think, either in the comments or by tagging me on Twitter at Soru. I do hope that this video was able to help you look at Teppei from a different perspective, and while you may still dislike the character, perhaps you'll be able to understand the mentality behind him and see how his actions do correlate in our world. I do have other characters I will be analyzing in the future, so if you enjoyed this analysis, please be sure to like and share the video around so that more people could join in the discussion. And be sure to subscribe for more character analysis videos. And with that, I'm Soru, and thank you for watching.